So somebody left a comment on my last video that perfectly explains why so many church musicians stay broke, burned out, and confused about their worth. And honestly, this comment represents a mindset that is killing church musicians. You know, I've been a church musician for over 30 years and I've seen pretty much every kind of situation. But every now and then a comment comes along that is so perfectly aligned with the problem that it becomes a teaching moment for all of us. Not to put anybody on blast, but to really just show church musicians the systems and the beliefs that shape how we're treated. So this is the comment, and I'll put it on the screen. It's pretty long, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to summarize it, and you can read the entire thing if you want. So basically, this person is saying that church is volunteer work. And if you don't want to volunteer, then don't. Like, nobody's forcing you to volunteer. He also says, I refuse to get paid because I want church to feel spiritual, not like a job. And small churches shouldn't have to pay musicians because the pastor is probably driving an Uber. He also says, if you want money, church musicians, if you want money, go find a paid gig instead of trying to convert volunteer work into a job. All right. So first, let me deal with this and really kill this myth that everything in church is volunteer work. That's just not the reality. Here's the thing. Churches pay guest speakers. They pay janitorial teams. They pay contractors. They pay, people to come and do the work. They even pay for the Coke machine that's sitting in the lobby. All of those lights and screens and projectors and all of that stuff that you see in church, they paid people to come put those things in to install them. That north location, that southeast campus that y'all trying to build, or that newly remodeled church that you're trying to build, they're paying people to do that. They're just not paying the musicians. It's funny. I remember I was playing for a church a long time ago, and this church was putting on this big conference where they were trying to bring in Bishop T.D. Jakes to be the headliner for the conference. So we reached out to T.D. Jakes' team to try to find out what it would cost to get him there and what his requirements was and all of that. Now get this. You know what his honorarium fee was to come and do something like that? It was $125,000. That's in addition to first-class flights for him and his team, lavish hotel stays, limo pickups, and a host of other things that I guarantee you, if I told you, you would be like, wow, that is just ridiculous. And you know what? You know what the church did? They put together a campaign to try to raise the money to get him to this conference. So all the while they were doing that, they were trying to raise the money to get him to the conference while not paying some of the musicians who had been working there for years. So we can't pretend like church is just some big volunteer utopia. That's just not the case. Money is flowing. Bills are being paid. Contractors are being paid and all of that. When the church is deciding not to pay musicians, it's not a holiness or a spiritual or ministry problem. It's a budget decision, point blank, period. Now, another part of this comment, this person says to church musicians, if you don't want to volunteer, just don't. Nobody's forcing you. Like, he's complaining that musicians are wanting to get paid, but nobody's also forcing them to go to churches where there's volunteer work. And see, here's the thing. That mindset completely ignores church culture. Why? Because it's not that musicians are just out here volunteering willy-nilly to go play at these churches for no money. They're being forced to. How, you ask? I'm glad you asked. See, Any musician that has really ever brought up pay to churches, and if you ask them about it, you will hear stories of being guilted, being shamed, being told that their motives and that their heart is in the wrong place, being told that they need to have humility or they're not humble enough, or being told that they're supposed to be here to serve and they don't have a good heart. All of this kind of stuff. This is what you hear. So that is not a free choice. That is not musicians just, oh, I'm going to go to the church and volunteer. That's them being manipulated and guilted into doing it. That's psychological pressure at its best. It's psychological pressure dressed up in spiritual language and spiritual clothing, right? Because they try to throw all of these Bible verses and all of that at you to say you should be serving and your heart is not right and all of that. There's a comment right now on one of my videos from a person who has been volunteering at a church for over 28 years. But he doesn't think his talent and his skills are good enough to even allow him to get paid. In his own words, he says he don't think he can take his skills outside of the church and get paid for them anywhere. And think about that for a moment. Think about how is it possible that someone who can be doing something for 28 years, and that's a long time, but maybe you're not a master of your craft. Maybe you're not the best keyboard player, organ player, drummer, whatever. Maybe you're not the best at it, but you got 28 years worth of experience. How is it that a person that has that level of experience can think to themselves and come to the conclusion that their gift, their talent that they've been honing for 28 years is not worth anything? It comes from church culture telling you that your gift isn't worth anything. I got plenty comments. You can look at the comments on my videos right now and see people who talk about where they've played for church and they've asked to get paid and they've been told, oh, you're not good enough yet. So they're given this mindset of their talent and their skills are not even good enough to get paid yet, but yet the church is still using them. How does that work? That is psychological conditioning at its best. You can't call something volunteer work when guilt is being used as the recruitment strategy. And another thing this person brings up in this comment is they say musician work should be volunteer, just like cooking and cleaning. So basically saying like the musician's job is pretty much equivalent to cooking and cleaning at the church, like the people in the kitchen and the people who sweep the floor. Here's the thing. Music requires years and years of training. It requires expensive equipment that you have to go out and buy with your own money that you're not being paid to do. It requires weekly, sometimes daily rehearsals and daily practices on your craft with yourself. It requires emotional and spiritual presence. Let me tell you a story. At my current church right now, I had one of my praise team members pass away during the pandemic. And it hit us all pretty hard because we had spent a lot of time together. Once everything shut down for the pandemic, we started going and recording our services and recording the music and all of that kind of stuff to have it on the stream. So we spent a lot of time together, and myself and my team were close to this person. And when this person passed away, I had to be the leader for my team. I had to show up and encourage everyone, let everyone know that it's going to be okay, that we can get through this, that we can still show up and sing on Sundays, that we don't have to fret. I've dealt with loss in my own personal life before, so I can give some guidance on how this stuff works. I had to do that while myself grieving the loss of this team member. The team member and I were pretty close as well. So I'm sad. I'm thinking, oh my God, like this person, they lead a song that, oh my God, we're just not going to even be able to sing this song anymore because every time I hear the song, I'm going to hear this person's voice in my head singing it. thinking all of that stuff. I'm sad, but I got to show up and do my job. I got to show up as the minister of music, as the leader of the music department at my church. I have to show up and get the job done. And I have to lead my team to be able to do that as well. That's the kind of spiritual and emotional presence and stuff that you have to have as a musician. This is not just some willy-nilly job that, oh, we learned how to play a couple of keys and we learned how to beat a drum or whatever, and we showed up and we want to get paid for everything. That's just not how this works. These are the types of things, and that's completely different from a kitchen person that's cooking in the kitchen or a person that's cleaning the floor. You know, musicians aren't showing up for 10 minutes to straighten up the chairs in the sanctuary before the service starts. You know, they're showing up to lead the entire emotional atmosphere of the service. So the thing is, when you're talking about it's just like cooking and cleaning or whatever, you're comparing a skill to a gift that took 10,000 hours or more to learn. You're comparing that to washing a potluck pan and, you know, washing out a skillet. That's just not a fair comparison. Now let's talk about the part of the comment where he brings up small churches. And this is where it gets really interesting. So you want to stick with me on this. So the person brings up in this comment that small churches can't afford full-time salaries to musicians. First of all, nobody's out here saying that small churches should be paying musicians full-time salaries. But any church, no matter how big or small, they can offer something. They can offer a stipend. They can budget something just to have for the musicians. They can offer to pay for the rehearsal or offer gas money or even just budget those kind of things in their budget so they have something to give the musicians at the end of the day so that they're not coming in using their gifts for free, and they can have something to at least go on that's motivating, that says, okay, I want to help keep doing this. Maybe I'm at a loss. I'm kind of volunteering my time mostly, but at least I'm getting something out of it. That's how this works. But here's the thing. You also don't want to be fooled by a lot of these small or what looks like small churches. A lot of these smaller churches are part of these larger denominations and districts like the South Regional such and such district. And when they're a part of those things, they have money flowing into them, basically in and out of them from those districts. So it's not like they're operating on them just like no money at all. You know, some are struggling for sure, but a lot of them are not. So we can't be fooled by these small churches and just think that everything is, you know, oh, they don't have a lot of money and the pastor's out here driving an Uber. I know of a small church right now. Actually, I know a few small churches, and I live in a very big city. I know a few small churches where the pastor is making a full-time salary. The musicians are being paid decently, but the pastor himself and his wife is making a full-time salary, and they're giving him a housing allowance. So they pay for his living expenses and all of that. So again, you don't want to be fooled about these small churches because it's really not about the size of the church anyway. What it comes down to is priority. It is about priority. Payment is not a luxury. It's not about us being, you don't want to have this luxury of being paid. It's about respect. Now let's talk about the part of this comment where he brings up what I'm calling the privileged volunteer effect. So I want to talk to the people who basically say stuff like, I don't really need the money. I just want to serve. And listen, that's great. That's beautiful for you. But that's you. And truly volunteering creates a system that you may not be aware of. Here's what the pattern is. Here's how it works. So financially stable person, a person who really doesn't need the money, goes in and volunteers and plays for the church. Great. No problem. So the church then stops budgeting for musicians because they don't really have to. You're getting free volunteer work out of them. Then sometime later, the person who's volunteering leaves. And then the church expects the next person who comes in who may not be of financial means, who may not be well off and can afford to volunteer his or her time on that same scale or on any scale, and they need to be paid for their talent and their time and their efforts. They bring them in and they expect them to work for free because the person before them did it. And then that creates the whole system of how this works. I remember I'll never forget this. I was at a church and it was a conference that was happening. It was a musicians conference that was happening. And I remember being really excited to be there because there was supposed to be these big wigs there that really knew stuff and that was experienced and they was going to teach all of this stuff. And I went to one of the breakout sessions and there was a pastor in there that was over this breakout session. And I remember sitting down in there and he got to talking. And he spent, I kid you not, he spent about 10 or 15 minutes bragging about how he doesn't pay musicians at his church. Literally bragging about it. Like he was saying, yeah, all of these churches, they go around paying their musicians or whatever. At my church, I get the people who want to do it out of the goodness of their hearts. And I never will forget that I was sitting there and I was thinking like, wow, is that something to brag about? Like you're basically bragging about getting free labor out of musicians. Forget the heart issue because your heart can be okay either way. And this is something I want people to know as well. Your heart doesn't change based on whether or not you're getting paid. That's just the fact of the matter. But again, this preacher was sitting there talking about musicians or not paying his musicians. And I was just like, oh my God, like, is this what it's coming down to? And I remember feeling really uncomfortable in that room because you had some people in there that was kind of like, dude, what is this dude talking about? But you had a good portion of the people talking about, cheering him on. Yeah, musicians. I'm looking around like, y'all are crazy. And I honestly, before the end of the session, I got up and left because this person was talking about something that I didn't believe in, that I don't believe that volunteer stuff. And let me say this carefully. Like I say, volunteering is fine. If someone chooses to volunteer, that is your choice. That's what you want to do. Fine. But again, you got to realize that what the system is that you're creating. The people who come after you or behind you, or even the people that's on your team right now may not be as well off as you and may not be able to afford to play for free. So that's this whole, volunteer thing when you're a well-off volunteer and you think everything is supposed to be like that because you off. That's just not the case for everyone who does this. Your generosity and your volunteer work shouldn't create poverty for someone else. Now, another part of this comment that is really important is where this person brings up the fact, or what he thinks is the fact, that nobody is forcing church musicians to go in and work for free or on a volunteer basis. And I want to hone in on that forcing part for a minute, because this really represents a misunderstanding of church culture. And I talked about it a little bit, but let's talk about this forcing thing, because churches absolutely forced musicians to do this, not physically, but emotionally. Here's how it works. So there's pressure to be loyal. There's pressure to not disappoint the leadership. There's pressure to not seem greedy, pressure to be humble, pressure to stay quiet, pressure to sacrifice. There's all of this pressure. And the thing is, what's funny about it? All of this stuff happens that we think that kind of stuff, this kind of pressure happens in these other weird sort of religions that we talk about, like Scientology and all of that kind of stuff. We think, oh, I can't see how people fall for that and people are manipulated into being that kind of stuff, when it happens in our churches too, just in a way that not a lot of people talk about. So it kind of goes under people's noses. This same kind of pressure that we talk about from other people, the pressure to stay silent and to respect leaders and all of that kind of stuff, it happens in the church. And specifically, it happens into musicians that make us want to stay quiet, that pressure of staying quiet, to not upset anyone, to be a team player and all of that kind of stuff. That pressure is a huge part of church culture. So, yes, church musicians actually are being forced and pressured into working for no pay and volunteering and paying for free. Pressure and being forced to do something doesn't require someone chaining your wrists together or putting a gun to your head. The pressure from the guilt works just fine. And here's what this all comes down to: the thinking and the belief behind the comment that this person left is really killing church music. You have young musicians that are completely leaving the church. None of them want to really be church musicians anymore, at least compared to older times. Older musicians, they're burnt out. They're just tired of it because, one, they're not being taken care of financially in any kind of way. Like I said, I'm telling you stories of people playing for 28 and 30 years. I've been a church musician myself for 30 years. And I experienced that burnout from time to time myself. So we're just tired. We don't even want to do it anymore. The budgets at these churches are starting to disappear because churches are misappropriating their funds or just not being good stewards over their money in a lot of ways. They're paying, $125,000 to get TD Jakes to come in and preach when the doorknobs on their church don't even work. That kind of stuff is happening. So what happens as a result of that is that the quality of everything, the music, the musician, all of that kind of stuff, it just continues to go down. It continues to decline. Worship, the church services, all of these things that we do, it becomes bland, it's unskilled, and it's even outsourced, because a lot of these churches now just result to, I can just get some tracks or whatever. So you get a lot of that's going on now. So the whole thing is just declining. And then the musical culture of the church just kind of collapses overall because there's nothing or nobody there to hold it up anymore. This belief that this person said in this comment, that he brought up all of these things, it represents the problem in and of itself, and it's a problem that we have to change. So what we have to do is reframe this entire issue. This isn't about greed. This isn't about just musicians out here just wanting money, just to want money and to be greedy and say, ha ha ha, I got all of the money, I'm well paid. That's not what this is about. It isn't about entitlement in any kind of way. It's not about feeling like, I'm the best musician and I deserve to be paid. It's not about that kind of stuff. What this is about is sustainability. It's about understanding that you need to put resources into the things that you want to keep going that fosters the welfare of the church. That's what it comes down to. We do it for everything else. Again, we think that there are churches that literally think paying Bishop T.D. Jakes $125,000 to come in and speak is some kind of way is going to do something big for their church. That's why they're willing to pay it. But again, they neglect the stuff, the day-to-day, the people that's there working consistently over and over again. So again, this comes down to sustainability. Pay isn't about some sort of luxury or anything like that. Pay is about value. If your church values music and musicians, it should be reflected in the budget, no matter how big or small the church. And musicians, don't let anyone come in and convince you that you wanting fair compensation for what you do somehow makes you less holy or less spiritual and all of that. As I said, volunteering can be beautiful. It can be a great thing, but poverty is not. And churches should never confuse those two things. Now, if this video hit home for you, there's a couple things I want you to do. First, go and leave a comment on this video and share your story about how these things have affected you that we talked about in this video. Second, make sure you like the video. That way it goes out to more musicians. And then lastly, you want to check out this video right here on the screen about 3 lies that church musicians believe. Because if this video hit home for you, this video here will hit home even more. It'll open your eyes even more. So check that one out, and I'll see you in the next video.